is Sarah C.B. Guthrie, and I am the artist who brings you joy. And I'm here today to talk about unlocking your creativity. And the original audience for this presentation were my classmates from Davidson College at our recent 35th college reunion. That's 35 years, folks. And we are, as a class, at that time of life of looking at what's next after jobs, after children leave the home, etc. And so as part of a panel presentation, I gave a talk about unlocking your creativity as a way to add to your life in this next phase. So who am I? I'm an abstract painter working in vibrant colors with distinct brush marks, inquiring into joy, what it is, how to find it, and why we all deserve it. And I've been doing this inquiry into joy for the past, since early 2017, so quite a while now. I've learned a lot along the way. So here's some word stuff about me, a very brief snapshot of my resume. In addition to being a professional artist, I have these different credentials, an MA, an MFA, and BA from Davidson, obviously. I've also done 25 years of marketing communications, as well as self-directed study in studio art. And I am a certified facilitator, creative problem solver, and a whole bunch of other things. And part of what I want to call out is there was a period of time where I was working in human resources, and I was the director of benefits for a large university in Washington, D.C. And that will come into play coming up. So the first question when we think about why should you unlock your creativity is, why should you unlock your creativity? When I was director of benefits, I noticed, because I would see people when they were getting ready to retire, I would see them coming in, and then often, hopefully decades later, but sometimes years or even months later, I would hear about how things were for the person who retired. And what I noticed, not to get too dark, but what I noticed was that people who had a plan for retirement, who had community and connection and a sense of purpose, usually thrived in retirement, even in the face of health challenges. And the people that struggled in retirement were people that had really devoted a lot of their time and life and energy to their work and family, but did not have a structure or a plan for how to retire and what to do. And there's a process that you go through. If you've gone from working a corporate job to entrepreneur, you've gone through this process, and it's called deinstitutionalization. And that term I learned from my coach, Charlie Gilkey, of Productive Flourishing. So what is deinstitutionalization? So this is the process of shifting your life from the corporate 9-to-5 schedule, the academic year schedule, to shifting your life onto your own schedule. And so in this change has its ups and downs. Like Mondays suddenly take on new meaning. Sunday evenings suddenly take on new meaning when you don't have to get up and go to work and go through that sharp transition of Monday mornings. There's an ebb and flow that happens to the year. You start finding yourself in different cycles, and it may be affected by the light, the seasonality, when you're seeing people, when you're not seeing people. And so part of what there is to do in this deinstitutionalization process is to both reclaim and rediscover your identity. And what I'm talking about here is the non-financial side of life after career and family. I'm not as focused, on financial planning and things like that. If you need a referral for financial planners, I know a couple of excellent ones. I'm happy to help you with that. But my focus here is thinking about that mental, emotional aspect of retirement and the physical health challenges. These can all be challenges that come up during this deinstitutionalization process. Part of what happens is, and why I want to talk about unlocking your creativity, is I want to encourage you to reframe what matters. So often in the culture here in the United States, we are defined as consumers or referred to as consumers, even more so than as citizens, which has interesting implications. But when you consume, you're always taking in, right? It's a very passive receiving. You're being fed things and you're meant to take them in. The energy shift to creating is quite different. When you're creating, you're drawing from within yourself and creating something out in the world. It may not be anything you show to the world, but you're creating it from inside and coming out as opposed to outside coming in. And that shift of energy is a really important one. It has an effect on what our legacy is in terms of, how people think of us long after we're gone. It can also, being creative can also be a model for family, loved ones, and community. As opposed to just being there, you're actively creating. It also has different measures of success. What you're measured on when you're creating for yourself is different than when you're consuming. One of my favorite quotes from Maya Angelou: "You can't use up creativity. The more you use, the more you have." So how do I find a creative outlet to unlock? So a lot of my colleagues at Davidson, they already had creative paths that they followed, whether it was playing music or singing. In fact, I ran into one colleague who was a long time dedicated pianist, and I never saw her, or I rarely saw her at Davidson, because she was often off rehearsing and learning her craft. So, but that's not the case for everyone. And so I have some places to look to figure out what kind of creative outlook would be fun for you to do, because one of the great things about creativity is it is fun. It can be fun. It can also be really frustrating, but we're going to, for the purposes here, focus on the fun part of it. So one of the tools I highly recommend is a book called The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. And I like to call this the archaeology of her book, because she takes you through a process of digging deep below the surface. And so the first part of the process, it's like a 12-week program that she's included in this book. And the first 4 weeks, you're focused on the past and looking back, and you're doing lists and activities and reflections and writing about how you grew up, what you wanted when you were a child, and that sort of thing. And then the middle part of the book, she focuses on what's your life in the present. And then the last part of the book, which a lot of people kind of stall out and don't get to, which I think is interesting, is where you're looking ahead to the future. And it's actually one of the most important parts of the book. So if you pick up The Artist's Way and start going through it and you find yourself getting stalled, hang in there. Keep going. It's worth it, I promise. And yes, it is some effort, but what she is able to help people cultivate in their life is really powerful. Two of the other tools that she has in there that I turn to on a regular basis as an artist. One is artist dates, and this is where you take yourself out and go do something fun by yourself. For me, one of my favorite things to do is to go to ceramic shops or paper stores. I absolutely love looking at paper. I always want to buy a bunch and come home and collage it, and then I remember having art practice and paintings to do and that kind of thing, and so I don't buy the paper. But I love looking at it and all the different colors and patterns and that sort of thing. And then one of the other tools that's quite famous is a practice called morning pages. And Cameron describes morning pages as meditation for Westerners. So it's a way to kind of help get your mind settled and quiet at the start of your day. And essentially you're writing 3 pages of just whatever your brain wants to talk about that morning, first thing in the morning. And it's not journaling. It's not meant to be writing. It's just clearing out the cobwebs of your mind every morning. And sometimes there is writing. Sometimes there is journaling that comes out. Sometimes you're just complaining about the weather for 3 whole pages. But the idea of the practice is you spend 30 minutes or so every morning just writing out what's going on in your brain and then getting into your day. It's a very, very, very powerful process. It can be daunting. It's worth it. The other way to find a creative outlook to unlock is to follow your joy. This is where I tend to advise people to look back to summer camp and high school and college. What were the electives you took? What activities did you love in summer camp? Two of my favorites were making lanyards and doing archery, or playing archery, practicing archery. Anyway, archery. I love those two things. I don't know what it is about them. They were so fun. I love the colors of the lanyards and kind of the meditation of putting them together. And the archery was something about the precision and actually being able to do it that was really appealing for me as an artist kid. The other thing to look at is, what are the things that you've always thought about? When I retire, I'm going to write that book, paint that wall, create that piece of music. Or what are the things you think every day? I wish I had more time to do X, Y, Z. Those are the places to look and write down and notice what are the creative practices that might be embedded in those that you could visit. One of the other things I want to address is what's called a polycreative challenge. So polycreatives are people that are creative in multiple disciplines. I'm both talented as a writer of nonfiction and also particularly as a painter. And I've come to terms with these two different ways of creative self-expression over the years. I used to struggle with them a little bit. But there are also people that are multidimensionally polycreative and have all different kinds of talents. And I would say, if that is you, fantastic. And don't worry about specializing. Just keep playing. If your thing is playing music one day and then you're like, I don't feel like playing music anymore, I'm going to go draw. Do that. Just go from creative practice to creative practice, whatever's kind of sparking you. The other thing that's really, really important to say, particularly to high achieving folks, is please remember, when it comes to creativity, not everything has to be a gig or a side hustle. One of the favorite questions people have when you start creating, particularly if they're creating art that people can look at, like a painting or drawings or ceramics, people say, oh, are you selling that? How much can I buy it from you? That kind of thing. And if you want to sell it, that's great, but don't feel like it has to become your job. Too often, doing art as a business, having done this for the last 8 years or so, I can tell you it's a lot of work, and it is not the same as doing art as a creative practice and just as a creative practice. Both are okay, both are valid, both have meaning. So don't feel like you have to turn your fun thing that brings you joy into something that's going to also bring you income. If you want to, that's great too, but don't feel like you have to. And it is as equally as valid to make art for the sake of art, to be creative for the sake of being creative, as it is to do it also for income. What is a weekend? This is one of my favorite quotes from the Dowager Countess, the character Violet Crawley of Downton Abbey fame. And I ask this because this is part of deinstitutionalization. Suddenly, what is a weekend becomes a real question, because when you're not showing up at the office Monday through Friday and having those kind of parameters of a weekend, or if your job was you worked Wednesday to Sunday, whatever it is that your weekend was, that changes when you retire or, again, when you become an entrepreneur. So part of this is figuring out, how do you find the time to have a creative practice? And this is consistently one of the biggest challenges, both for professional artists. I struggle with this all the time. Even though it seems like I should just be painting 40 hours a week or whatever, it's kind of not the way it works. There are definitely weeks where I'm painting 40 to 80 hours a week, but more often it's it's not as long as that. And that's because there's a lot else involved in running an art business. So what I want to share with you is there are some kind of guidelines to start with. So one is, if you're starting out with a creative practice, what I'd recommend is committing to at least 15 to 30 minutes a day, every day, including your what is a weekend time, because having that regular revisiting your creative practice is going to do more to keep it alive and keep it kind of growing. If you're more advanced into your creative practice, I recommend going to at least daily 1 to 2 hour focus blocks. That's a term, again, from Charlie Gilkey of Productive Flourishing. And doing those focus blocks 3+ times each week. I tend to have about 10 to 12 focus blocks probably a week, sometimes more, depending on the season of where I am and preparing for a show. And a focus block is going to be time where I'm focused deeply on creating, whether it's my writing or painting. So some pro tips around finding the time: put reminders in your calendar, schedule it on your calendar, put reminders on your phone, make sure you get alerted that, hey, your creative practice time is coming up. One of the other challenges that can be, particularly if you're still working full-time and you haven't, or you've got other commitments and you haven't yet transitioned to your schedule being fully your own, is you might have to get up extra early. I'm so sorry, but you might have to get up extra early in order to get to your creative practice. But I will tell you the good news of this. So when I was working full-time, I would make sure to get up 50 or about half an hour earlier than I normally did. And I would make tea and head straight to the studio, and I would get to doing art for 15 to 30 minutes every single day. And it was transformative. To go into the office after having done creativity in the morning after having painted in the morning, was incredibly powerful. It changed how I felt about my day, it changed how I felt about myself. So trust me, if the only way to do it is to get up at 5:45 instead of 6:15, it is worth it. The other key pro tip is to talk with your partner and your family. You are going to probably need the buy-in from the people in your day-to-day life to say, hey, I'm going to be starting to take some time to explore my creativity. Here's what that looks like. And just make sure you're having that conversation so that you get supported for it. The other thing that I noticed when I made my initial 15 to 30 minute commitment, or is a 30-minute commitment to practice art every day, this was 10 years ago, is I noticed that time begets time. So I would go in for 30 minutes, and on some days that 30 minutes turned into 45, and some days it turned into 2 hours if I had that time and I didn't have to go in the office right away. And it always, always felt good. And there were definitely, the majority of the days I had that 30 minutes and that was it. Sometimes I would take it at lunchtime if I couldn't do it in the morning for some reason or other. But it always felt good. It was always the right thing to do. One of the other benefits of having this regular time, whether it's 3 to 7 times a week or 15 to 30 minutes every single day, is it helps you stay connected with your project. One of the challenges of being creative in these kind of smaller bites of time is that there's a transition to getting into the project. There can be a resistance to it, and there's a transition for coming out of the project. There can be a resistance to wanting to come out. But if you have this as a daily practice, while at first those transitions may feel bumpy, with time those get smoothed out and get easier to move through. So here I am paraphrasing Virginia Woolf, who famously said something along the lines of, a woman must have a room of her own and 500 a year in order to write. And so I've modified this a bit for contemporary times to say a person must have time, resources, community, and a space of their own if they are to unlock creativity. Thank you, Virginia. So this is about space. When you think about a room of one's own, and having space and having a standing set up space to create is one of the most important aspects to having a regular creative practice. So that means if you play music, that your piano, your guitar, that they're out, they're ready, they're where you can see them. They're maybe even near where you get up in the morning, or far from where you get up in the morning if you want to be able to really let it out and not wake up the rest of the family. In my case as an artist, it meant either having my papers and pens set up on a desk when I had very little studio space, to having like water ready and paint like covered and ready to go the next day. Those were, it's funny how it was a little step as at the end of one painting practice, making sure I clean out the water and get the fresh water ready for the next time I'm coming in, how much that smoothed out the transition to getting into the creative practice and having the space. So that's another quick pro tip there. So having the space makes all the difference in the world. And what will happen as you continue to go to that space, there's a kind of like a muscle memory that happens for you when you sit there, that even if you're feeling a little bit blocked, it will come. The creativity will come. So what are some ways to create space? So one, this happened to some of my colleagues at Davidson when we went to college. They returned home at Thanksgiving break to find that they were sleeping on the couch because their mother had turned their bedroom into a sewing room. So their mother was reclaiming the space and using it for her creative practice, which I loved for her, even as I felt sad for my classmate that they were sleeping on the couch for Thanksgiving. That's kind of a bummer. But anyway, that is one of the options, is to convert one of your rooms to a proverbial sewing room, a space where you can have a creative practice. The other is converting a garage to a wood shop or a studio. This is very common. Garages tend to be kind of flexible space. There's often a lot of good ventilation. So if you have like an acoustic practice or woodworking, something like that where there's a lot of stuff in the air, a garage can be a really, really great place for that kind of practice. Building an ADU, I forget what this stands for, ask your real estate agent, but it's basically a little building adjacent to your house. There's different city, state regulations about that, or a she shed or a he shed in your back garden. Renting space is also possible. There's a lot of spaces to rent. Or taking over a table or a desk and saying, hey, this desk that's in the kitchen that normally is where we pay the bills, I'm taking this over. This is where I'm going to be writing every morning. No bills may be paid here. You need to find another place for that. I also recommend, if you're feeling stuck for finding space, is hiring a professional organizer. One of my classmates, Carrie Prince, is a very brilliant professional organizer. In the Los Angeles area. Here in the Seattle area, we have Spring Courtwright of Tidy Wild, who I also highly recommend. I've worked with both of them. They're both brilliant and really excellent at helping find, discover, and create space, particularly for creativity. So one of the last parts of this talk is how to sustain your creative practice. So you've done the things, right? Like you've identified, okay, I'm going to play with writing and making little felt animals and knitting. Those are my 3 creative practices that I'm going to play with and explore and see where they take me. I've figured out a space to store things. I've figured out how to have the time for doing it. Now I need to figure out how to make it keep happening. And the answer here is always community, community, community. It is with other people, it is in conversations with other people, in time with other people, that we create a network that helps support us and keep us accountable for staying connected to our creative practice. So there are different places you can find that. You can sign up for a class. That is a phenomenal way to have a good structured time and place for a creative practice. I did that for years, particularly as I was early in my artist development, trying to figure out like, how do I want to paint? What do my paintings look like? I had, I think it was like a class a week that I would go to, and just really got to be close friends with the other artists in that class. And it was a beautiful, and that was just at a local art center. It wasn't at a college or university. I'd also recommend looking for group meetups. There are all sorts of artist meetups, sketch dates. There's even like quiet reading in pubs and stuff like that. There's definitely knitting outings. There are ways to find other people who are doing creative things and do it together with them in a group. I'd also encourage you to, if you haven't done the Artist Way or you're thinking about doing it, to look for an Artist Way group in your local area. That can be a terrific support for going through the book. Also, if you have a friend who is diving into creating a creative practice as well, call your friend and say, hey, let's check in with each other on a regular basis about our creative practice. And then the last place I would suggest is looking for a coach or a mentor. There are all sorts of people that are coaching Artist Way, that are coaching different aspects of creativity or mentoring. And so have a look and see who you can find for that. So the last suggestion I would have would be to subscribe to get my weekly joy practice tips. I don't know how to turn off that little screen at the bottom of the corner, but if you go to my website, artistgu3.com/subscribe, you'll be able to sign up for my weekly joy practice tips. And in there I talk a lot about what I'm doing in the studio and how it translates into creating a joy practice. So thank you so much for listening today. I hope you found this helpful. Please feel free to share this with friends or colleagues that you know are going through these kind of big life transitions or keep talking about wanting to be an artist but don't know how to do it. And please note also that everything I've talked about here today, you don't have to be an artist to be into this. This is open to all. Being an artist is not a requirement for being a creative, but being creative is a requirement for being an artist, but it doesn't work the other way, right? So if you're generally a more analytical person, that's totally fine. You can still have a creative practice. It's just a matter of finding the one that really speaks to you. Thank you so much, and please share this video with someone else.